well, I must be onto something here. So I took a photographer and trooped out at 6 p.m. or whatever to the meeting and confronted locked gates. And I thought, this is most unusual church. And fairly quickly, a couple of sort of the local heavies, they weren't that heavy physically, but, you know, they were heavies, came and stood at the gate and sort of stood in my way and said, well, you can't come in. And I said, well, look, I knew enough to know at that point that the Queensland Supreme Court, a different state of Australia, had removed their rate exemption because they were not running a place of public worship, and that they had appealed that all the way through the courts and tried to get it to the High Court and had failed to get it into the High Court. So the Supreme Court decision stood that they were not a place of public worship, and therefore they'd lost their rate exemption. I'd confirmed that in Victoria they were still getting their rate exemption, so I thought, well, ipso facto, you must be public. I'm going to try and get in. So I made that argument on the kind of grassy patch outside the locked gates in outer suburban Melbourne for about 5 minutes until they got sick of me and closed the gate. And they must have closed the gate and walked inside, but people were still coming in their cars down the driveway. So I just decided I would walk down the driveway. At this point, I'd lost the support of my photographer, I must say, who hung back, quite conservatively. So I started walking down the driveway, waving a copy of this Supreme Court judgment as a shield, and three, at that point, quite burly young brethren confronted me and said, "We're going to call the police. You're trespassing. Go away." And the law of trespass says once you're warned and whatever that you're trespassing, you should probably get off the property. So I'd made my point by that point anyway. Got off the property, stuck around, got some photos. Was physically threatened. A car driven right up to our ankles after the service on their way out. And the next morning, I got a legal threat from their then lawyer, Philip Wiseman, for defamation and trespass and all sorts of other things. I thought, well, I must be onto something here.